Mr. Speaker, this is absolutely outrageous. It is astonishing that we've had to summon the government to the benches today, and they cannot even tell us what the pay rise they're going to get and whether it's going to be funded. That is not allowing us to scrutinise this in this House. The government said they would tax private schools to fund £6,500 more teachers, but the reality is that state schools haven't got any of that money. Instead of that, we've had broken promises on compensating schools for the jobs tax, confirmation from DfE itself that there will be a shortfall in teachers' pay funding that we are not allowed to discuss here today in this urgent question, and uncertainty as to what the actual pay rise is for teachers. It is a disgrace, and it is the opposite of what people who voted for Labour expected. All of this in the final 2 weeks that head teachers up and down the country have to decide whether to make teachers redundant in time for September. In fact, sadly, many schools will have already made the difficult decision to let good teachers go. These are job losses on her watch, due to her inability to provide schools with the clarity that they need. And please, don't just take my word for it. Dan Moynihan from the Harris Federation say they are proposing to make 40 to 45 teachers redundant. John Coles, the Chief Executive of United Learning, who runs 90 state sector academies, said the trusts have been left with a £10.5 million a year of unfunded costs. He said it's no good the Treasury waving their hands and saying efficiency. That will be 400 job losses. Sector-wide, that would extrapolate to ruinous harm in one of the well-functioning public services, tens of thousands of redundancies. Simon Pink, the finance director of the Elliott Foundation, which has 36 primaries, said this is the toughest budget for a generation. And one secondary school head teacher has already had to cut 2 teaching assistant posts and a teacher role due to rising national insurance and anticipated wage rises. Mr. Speaker, what is the pay rise that the government is recommending for teachers? The Prime Minister's spokesman said on the 28th of April that there will be no additional funding for pay. Yesterday, the government started to U-turn on winter fuel. Will she now fully U-turn and fund the national insurance rise and agree to fully fund the pay increases, whatever they are?
Minister.
Laura Trott's blistering address in the Commons wasn't just a scathing critique. It was a direct exposure of Labour's breathtaking incompetence. In what should have been a straightforward matter of funding and transparency, Labour has instead delivered confusion, chaos, and betrayal. Trott had to drag ministers to the benches just to ask a basic question. What will teachers be paid, and who's footing the bill? The fact that no one could answer, in the middle of a national staffing crisis in education, isn't just irresponsible. It's a national disgrace. Labour promised to tax private schools to fund new teachers. A headline-grabbing stunt designed to pander to class warfare without doing the hard work of governing. Not a single state school has seen a penny. What they've seen instead is a storm of broken promises, unfunded mandates, and deliberately obscured budget gaps. It's not just fiscal mismanagement. It's political deceit. And it's happening on Labour's watch. Teachers and head teachers across the country are now left holding the wreckage. They're being forced to fire good, experienced educators not because they want to, but because Labour has failed to give them even the most basic clarity. These are real human costs. Real children losing real mentors. Schools collapsing under rising costs, unfulfilled funding pledges, and a government too busy spinning headlines to bother with reality. And it's not just Laura Trott saying this. Education leaders from the Harris Federation, United Learning, and the Elliott Foundation are all sounding the alarm. They are planning mass redundancies. 400 teachers here, tens of thousands projected across the sector. Why? Because Labour refuses to put its money where its mouth is. Because the Treasury's answer to a funding crisis is to wave its hands and mumble efficiency. It's the kind of nonsense you expect from bureaucrats detached from reality. But now it's the official position of the party that promised to prioritize education. Let's be brutally honest this is the biggest education betrayal in a generation. Labour sold voters a utopia and delivered austerity in disguise. They exploited the emotional appeal of saving schools and taxing the rich, then quietly abandoned those promises the moment the cameras stopped rolling. And now, they expect head teachers to clean up the mess. This isn't just a funding failure. It's a moral one. A party that claims to champion working families is now overseeing the destruction of one of the most essential professions in Britain, and doing it with stunning indifference. Labour can't keep hiding behind empty slogans and blaming the past. They are the ones in charge now, and they're failing. If this is Labour's idea of educational reform, then Britain's schools are in serious danger. And if this is what transformational leadership looks like under Stormer and Reeves, then voters should brace for more betrayal, more cuts, and more silence in the face of collapse. Because if even teacher pay, the bedrock of any functioning education system, can be treated with this level of disdain and dishonesty, then what hope is there for the rest of the public sector?
Thing was a spectacle, a theatre, a performance to make sure that the British people did not riot. Yeah. Now, while that might have justification, because rioting tears apart a country, its economy, it creates lasting damage that is very, very hard to repair. So while on some part controlling that and mitigating it is purposeful, the manner in which this has been done, and let's not forget there was a man who died in prison during.
Yes, yeah. He was jailed for holding up a placard, by the way. Right. This is another thing about Lucy Connolly, of course, that she got a considerably longer sentence than many of the actual rioters. People who were throwing bricks at the cops, people who were trying to set fire to mosques and asylum seeker hotels got less than Lucy Connolly.
One last thing I've got to say, Kev, because it's so important to point this out, so important, about looking at the fabrication and the lies and the curation of what went on during that period. We now know that he knew the details of that case. He knew them.
Of course he did.
He knew what was later released to the public. At the time where he was presiding over all of this pantomime, he knew the truth.
Yeah, he did. I've got one last question for you. Before we go to break, and we're going to discuss the Chagos Islands after that break. Explain this to me. Why is Lucy Connolly in jail? Why was she jailed for such a long time while the self-confessed child sex abuser, paedophile, former BBC newsreader Hugh Edwards walks the streets free? Why is that?
Oh, because it's very simple. Like I said, if you actually were to jail every...
In a development as contentious as it is costly, Labour leader Keir Starmer is facing growing backlash over the UK's decision to hand over sovereignty of the Chagos Islands to Mauritius, a move critics argue will not only rewrite British history, but also slap taxpayers with a £30 billion bill. The political fallout erupted this week after TalkTV hosts Alex Phillips and Kevin O'Sullivan torched the decision in a fiery segment, warning that the so-called Chagos deal represents a national self-inflicted wound, masquerading as diplomacy. Phillips didn't mince words. Who cares about rolling back our history? I've no idea why anyone thinks this is a good idea. O'Sullivan echoed the sentiment, framing the decision as yet another capitulation by a Labour Party, seemingly allergic to defending Britain's legacy. The Treasury has been tight-lipped, but leaked documents suggest the bill could soar to £30 billion once all costs are tallied. This includes dismantling military infrastructure, compensating displaced personnel, and potentially paying reparations or development funds to Mauritius. In an era of squeezed public finances, that figure is drawing fury across the political spectrum. What's especially jarring to critics is the timing. With mounting tensions in the Indo-Pacific, the Red Sea and the Gulf, and a growing need for rapid response capabilities across volatile regions, seeding this base, so centrally located to global flashpoints, ounce to unilateral disarmament, For Stormer, the Chagos deal is quickly becoming a political liability. A poll released this week by Redfield Wilton shows a sharp dip in voter confidence over Labour's handling of defence and foreign policy, with more than 60 of respondents saying the government should retain control of the island. In Whitehall, there is growing concern that the Chagos handover could set a dangerous precedent for other territorial claims. The Falklands and Gibraltar are already being whispered in policy circles as potential flashpoints. If Stormer's government is willing to surrender one strategically vital territory, the fear is it could embolden challenges elsewhere.